a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall. We built the pyramids. Math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a big bang.
All right, so as we barrel into this first question of the series, and as you know, we have a whole series. If you got a card from us, and it gives the series more or less what we'll cover each week. So this week is Darwinian evolution, fact or fiction, or true or false. And next week you'll see a whiteboard with the next question. I believe next week is the Bible legit? Is it reliable? So we're going to really delve into that. And so let's pray. Father, we just thank you for the truth of your word. We also thank you for the testimony and the proclamation of creation. As to your reality, we'll look to you to speak with us, to visit with us, to be a part of this entire presentation. I look to you to customize it. Help me to underscore what needs to be underscored here tonight. And Lord, I come against any kind of doubt or skepticism or unbelief in the name of Jesus. And I speak a spirit of liberty into this place. Amen. So, that was a pretty entertaining icebreaker. So can you know for sure, and I think a lot of people struggle. Y'all let me know when I get my other mic back. A lot of people really do struggle. Can I know for sure? Can I have confidence in the faith that I hold? And so this is an evidence-based view of faith. So it's a series, what we call apologetics. And so Darwinian evolution, fact or fiction, it's really fascinating to me that the random polling on campus today was the majority think it's false, which I'm kind of humored by that. But the American public is more or less kind of divided on it. So, but as far as today, it's going to be a fairly technical message. I'm going to emphasize a lot of science. I have a degree in geology. I worked in oil and gas for a few years out of college. And then I ended up a medical device rep and kind of went completely off the path. There was a lot more money in medical devices than there was in geology. I had a growing family. I had to find a way to provide for them. But that was me in college. I went to SFA, if y'all are familiar with it. I have a bachelor's degree. And that was a picture of doing field mapping in Big Bend National Park back in the day. I get 1 hour, oftentimes I get 1 hour to kind of rebut what is often a lifetime of indoctrination. We are getting inundated systematically with a Darwinian perspective or Darwinian worldview. And so oftentimes I just get a short chance to try to change your mind. If you've been I assume there's probably at least a few people here tonight that maybe you're hanging in a balance and you're wondering. And sometimes people just want to hear the other side. Nobody wants to be duped. Nobody wants to say, well, all I've ever heard is one side, right? So a lot of times, this is your chance to hear at least an hour of the other side, and it's going to take me that long. I've got a lot of video clips to show you. It's going to be very exciting. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The first verse of the entire Bible, probably the most read verse of the entire Bible, the most read book of the entire Bible. You want to guess which one it is? Genesis. Because people get inspired. I want to read the Bible. I'm going to start from the very beginning and read the whole thing. So they all start in Genesis. And they don't get very far. So I have a notable thought for you. This is just me quoting myself. Undermine this single verse, and we undermine the credibility of the entire Bible. How we see Genesis 1:1 has an enormous impact on how we understand the questions of where did we come from, who are we, where are we going. It affects how we view ethics, civil and moral law, and even the founding principles of the United States and really the whole of Western civilization. And the question is, can you really know for sure? And I want to preface everything that it's not just a science case that we make. It's not just an apologetics case. There's a matter of the heart here. And so if your heart is receptive and you're responsive and you have an openness to the truth as it comes to you. But, sometimes you can ask somebody, well, if I could convince you to your satisfaction beyond a shadow of the doubt that this is true, that the claims of Christ are true, would you change your life? And often people will be honest and say, no, I wouldn't. It wouldn't matter to me whether you can prove it or not. But that goes to the heart, you see. So oftentimes, Jesus said it in John 7:17, he says, if anyone is willing to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it's of God or whether I speak from myself. So he's saying if you have a willing heart, that kind of a fundamental love for God, a fundamental love for truth, then you have a lot better chance of actually grasping the truth in your journey through life. The new atheists often will ask, there's no evidence for God with a little g. Now, let me tell you, if Darwinian evolution is true, doesn't that mean that God is really not necessary? And a lot of the people I've talked to, along my journey, atheists, people are agnostic or they're self-proclaimed. I think there's actually very few real atheists. If you put them in a boat in the middle of the ocean and surrounded with sharks, I think they'll pray. In most cases. But anyway, if it's true, does that mean God is not really necessary? Many people, because evolution, the Darwinian view of evolution, is mechanistic. It's totally naturalistic. In other words, all the complexities that are explained, that we see today, are all explained by a natural process, which we call Darwinian evolution. And it doesn't require God. It doesn't require anything supernatural. The theory in itself is natural and mechanistic. You follow? So by definition, evolution is implicitly atheist. Even though most of them, I think most evolutionists, my geology professors, most of them are actually theists. So it's not that just because they're holding to a theory which is implicitly atheistic, it doesn't mean they're atheists, because that goes against nature. So many people that ascribe to Darwinism are not necessarily atheists. Often they're actual theists. But all the atheists are. They all embrace Darwinism because it's the foundation, it's the rationale of their belief system. So are you just the product of impersonal forces that time and chance has produced? Is that really who you are? Is that the end product of you as a human being? So Proverbs 28:23-7 says, for as he thinks, in other words, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So if we're all told that we're just nothing but sophisticated biochemical machines, we're just animals, then why would we be shocked or surprised when we start acting like animals? You see, and of course it's totally contrary to the scripture. We're not animals. We're human beings with intrinsic value made in the image of God. So when we look at, first I want to just talk about intelligent design for a little bit, and it's kind of one of those things that's kind of a duh. I mean, I think once you start really looking at human anatomy and you look at just the ear, you look at just the eye and nothing else, you look at the heart and the circulatory system, and you start looking at all these things and how they interact, I don't know how anybody can rationally not understand there's a designer behind all this. So the discovery, but I'm going to just mention about DNA, of course, just look at DNA. The discovery that DNA codes information in a digital form points decisively back to a prior intelligence. I'm quoting Dr. Stephen Meyer. Microsoft, interesting about DNA, is Microsoft made a deal with Twist Biologics. They are still in business and they're actually publicly traded, Twist Biologics, and they create from life forms, they create a DNA that's kind of an artificial DNA but built from real life DNA. And they use it for storage. So the data density of DNA is orders of magnitude higher than conventional storage systems, with 1 gram of DNA able to represent close to 1 billion terabytes. So that's why they're trying to tap the DNA technology, which is designed by God. So they're tapping it, trying to figure out, because that's one of the kind of looming crisis in the computer world, is how do we get more storage space? And guess what? The storage space is in your DNA. So the question is it's often not allowed in academic institutions today. That is, if the scientific evidence of design points toward an intelligent creator, then why would we not let it lead us there? Why is it forbidden? If the evidence is screaming and pointing and saying God is there and he's a creator, then why won't we let the evidence take us there? And so often they'll say, well, but that's religion. Well, no, it's not. If it's evidence-based, and that's the whole thing we're looking at today. It's an evidence-based way of looking at this. So common sense and reason, the complexity that we see around us, the existence of a chair, you're all sitting in one, is evidence of a chair maker. Pretty simple. So I think this is one of the best clips I know of to explain to me, that explains design and complexity and why we believe there's an intelligent designer behind all of it. And so we'll run this.
And thought a cell was, say, a mud hut. What do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where, on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make protein. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
All right, so let's look at biology. Do you have any biology majors here today? Anybody? Got a few? Raise hands. Okay. All right, so there is a form of evolution that creationists do believe in, even theistic evolutionists. I mean, no, there's people that believe in God. There is a form of evolution that I believe in. And so I want to try to explain this. And the way to understand this, the tree versus the orchard. So if you'll notice, the tree on the left is the Darwinian model of evolution. Everything begins at one single cell and then expands from there over millions, billions of years. But the creationists, what we believe from a biblical model is that there is a micro, what we refer to as microevolution that occurs within various kinds of animals. So they do change and alter and adapt over time. So Genesis 1:25 says, God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And, you know, I mean, I could spend a lot of time on this, but the fact is that there are these unseen barricades from one type of animal, from one kind of animal to another kind of animal. And if you try to interbreed them over a period of time, that at some point they become unable to reproduce. And it's just kind of there's some sort of a mechanism in there that doesn't allow them really to go beyond their realm. Does that make sense? And so the mechanism of evolution, so macroevolution, for it to occur, new genetic information must come from somewhere. In other words, the Darwinist model, and that is if you go from, say, one kind of animal to another entirely different kind of animal, if you go from a dinosaur to a bird, for instance, then how does that happen unless there's new information, new genetic information has to be introduced, or there's nowhere for it to go. Unless it's the loss of information, sometimes an animal may lose information and they may lose their sight if they're generationally stuck in a cave or something. And so that would be kind of a reverse evolving. They're losing information. But how do you go from one kind of animal? How do you go from a chimp type animal, an Australopithecus or something like that, one of the apes of the past, so to speak, and how do you get to a human being? In other words, how do you go from one completely different kind of creature to another kind of creature? And the only way that could happen is you have to be able to introduce new genetic information. Does that make sense? So where does that information come from the evolutionary standpoint? And so for macroevolution to occur, new genetic information must come from somewhere. Mutations are the only source of new information. That's it. There is nothing else. A mutation. So the entire theory, the house of cards of Darwinian evolution, is all based on mutations. You combine mutations with natural selection, and there you have the magic. That is the engine, that is the mechanism that makes evolution happen, ostensibly. So the mechanism of evolution is mutations plus natural selection. We should have a screen for that. Y'all keep moving. What is a mutation? A mutation is a genetic accident. So there are two pictures of mutations. Somebody with too many toes. In fact, probably we have mutants in this room. I've had people demonstrate. I actually do this as a 6-part series, so I'm cramming it all in one night. But I'll have people stand up and go, I can do this, I can bend my fingers this way, and I can bend my joints that way, and they've got all these special gifts that are actually forms of mutations. But they don't necessarily ensure their survival or their advancement as a human being. You follow? So the mechanism, you have to combine these two mutations. An idea is natural selection will favor one over the others, and that there will be improvement over time by this new introduction of genetic information. Where does this vast, complex information come from? Are mutations or genetic accidents sufficient to explain the progression of species into other types of species? What is a mutation? We just talked about it. Are mutations and natural selection able to produce greater complexity? And I'll tell you right now, it's an insufficient mechanism. In fact, the more mutations you have in a species or an animal group, the worse they're going to be. I mean, it's kind of like, how many of you are sitting there thinking, one day maybe I'll get married and I'll have children, and you're going to be praying for the good of mankind and for the good of science that your child will have mutations. Who would in their right mind do that or even think that way? Because we all know they're bad. Nobody ever prays that. Nobody ever looks, first thing you do, you get a new baby. I've had 4, my wife had 4 of them. Anyway, so you look at them, and the first thing you do, I don't know why we do this, we all count the toes and fingers. We want to make sure there's 5. We want to make sure there's 5 on each limb. And if there's a 6th one, what do? They cut it off. They always cut them off. So if we really believe that mutations were good, then why do we cut them off? Why are we ashamed of them? Why do we want this person to be normal? Hudson, how many toes do you have? Do you have 10? Did you originally have 10? Is there something you're not telling us? Okay, I want to see why they cut it off. Okay. All right, so here's an example. The poor fruit fly. The fruit fly is kind of a tongue twister. They have been experimenting on this poor little creature for 100 years with laboratory attempts to try to accelerate mutations because its gestation is so quick, and they can simulate really 1,000 years of evolution in a very short amount of time in the laboratory. So a fruit fly, 3,000 mutations were observed, and they would subject them to radiation and all kinds of stuff to try to get them to mutate. So 3,000 mutations, millions of years in a short time with the fruit fly. Catalysts of radiation, short gestation. Okay, so fruit flies that deviate too far from their original design become sterile. That's what I was telling you earlier. And they end up with no wings, no eyes. Sometimes they end up with extra wings, small wings, curled wings, extra legs, etc. But we really never get a better fruit fly. The dirty little secret is this: how often do beneficial mutations actually occur? And this is what they never tell you. Because if we know how many actually occur, then we're going to go, hey, wait a minute. How is mutation and combined with natural selection, how is that an adequate mechanism? If there's so rare a beneficial mutation, then how do we ever see a progression in species? So here's the dirty little secret. How often do they occur? You could probably run the numbers just based on the fruit fly. But to quantify the ratio of harmful to beneficial mutations, there are 186 beneficial mutations versus 453,732 harmful mutations. That is a ratio of 1 beneficial mutation for every 2,440 harmful mutations. So how does that work? That's a ratio of, I think I put it up there, 0.00041. So it's not an adequate mechanism. It's not sufficient to be able to produce new information and then produce an improvement in the kind of an animal. It's nearly impossible, in my opinion. I just don't see how, when you understand the numbers and the ratios, how it's even possible. But, you know, if you're in a biology class and you have a really slick textbook and you have a slick professor, they can somehow do smoke and mirrors and somehow it looks plausible. But really the science is not plausible, ladies and gentlemen. So if we look at the chimpanzee to human, this is a big debate, is how similar is the genetic homology of a chimp to a human? And the idea is that, well, if we can show they're similar, then that means we must be related by evolution. So I'm going to, just for devil's advocate here, I'm going to use a 98.5% similar genetics between a chimp and a human being. Now, there's a lot of debate right now. They're saying really now they're bringing it down to 85%. But we're just going to use 98.5% just for the sake of argument. Because the case is really strong, whether you go 98.5 or whether you go 85%. So here's what so once you understand that for a ape-like creature to progress to human, there are a certain number of mutations which must occur. New genetic information has to be introduced to get you from a chimp-type animal to a human being. So how many mutations would it take to get you from there from point A to point B? And it looks like it would take about 250,000 beneficial mutations would be required in sequence, they have to be in the right order, over the last 5 million years. We'll be generous with the 5 million. We'll give them 5 million years. We could give them 10 million. It wouldn't make any difference how much time we give them. 250,000 beneficial mutations have to occur when we just looked at the ratio of beneficial versus harmful mutations. It's just implausible. So don't be thrown off by this similar homology of genetics. It means nothing. What matters is how many mutations would it take to get from this creature to this creature. And 250,000 in 5 million years is implausible. So let's move on. That's biology. Let's go to physics. The second law of thermodynamics, it means it's actually, so we look at the laws of physics, they actually are the opposite of evolution. They're counterproductive to evolution. The second law, it basically, okay, you see the picture on the left, what it's showing you is the idea of something that's compact and orderly, and then over time it becomes arrayed in disorder. And that's what we all experience. We see it with aging. You see it with your car. When you buy a brand new car, I'm sure a lot of you haven't bought brand new cars lately. But if you buy it, doesn't matter how new and shiny and beautiful it is, within a very short period of time, something goes wrong with it. Something needs to be repaired. Something needs to be maintained. Because why? Because everything is automatically breaking down on its own. And unless we exert intelligence upon that process, it will deteriorate. That's the second law of thermodynamics. And that's the opposite of evolution, which they're saying is the absolute opposite. Everything's getting better. Second law of thermodynamics says that over time everything's getting worse. Psalms 102, there's a number of scriptures that actually describe the second law. This one I like. It says, of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes. They will grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them. So here you have this idea, and you see it in Romans 1 as well, where the earth is wearing out. It's running down. It's going through a fit, in essence. But over time, it's wearing out, and that's the second law. So mutations are a manifestation of the second law of thermodynamics. They are actually symptomatic of the breaking down of order. They are not beneficial. They are not something that you want. It's not something anybody, it's just so ridiculous that we built this entire house of cards around mutations and natural selection, and we created a God out of it, a false God. So what I'm referring to when I talk about mutations in the context of the second law of thermodynamics, we're talking about genetic entropy. Genetic entropy, meaning that even the biological systems that we're all familiar with, they break down automatically too over time. In genetics, this is the definition of genetic entropy. Entropy is another word for the second law. In genetics, genetic entropy is a mutational meltdown in which the genome of any population accumulates deleterious mutations more rapidly than beneficial mutations. See, no species can handle but so many mutations. They can handle a load of mutations only to a point when it begins to tear them down, when it begins to undermine their health, so to speak. So now let's look at geology, my favorite topic. There are three big problems with the fossil record. The first one is the abrupt appearances of trees, fish, reptiles, and mammals in the fossil record with no predecessor, with no precursor, with no evolutionary gap or anything before them. They just suddenly appear in the fossil record, completely developed, completely finished trees, fish, reptiles, and mammals. The second one is the missing transitional forms, which is a prediction failure, and Darwin himself would admit that. Now the third one is out-of-place fossils, and there are tons of them, or contemporaneous fossils. Now let's look at the abrupt nature of the fossil record. Sudden abrupt appearance of these categories, huge categories. Darwin called the flower an abominable mystery because he couldn't see how you had this thing appear fully developed. So here's what Darwin actually said in Origin of Species. Have y'all ever read Origin of Species? I'm curious how many of you have actually read the book. I'd like to see your hands, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, a few of you have. I think it's good. You should read it because I found myself agreeing with Darwin. I was expecting when I read it that I would be like, I'm going to read this awful, horrible thing that revolutionized science in the 1800s. But the fact is that Darwin was more honest than you may realize. And he posed several considerations concerning his theory of evolution. He said, if the prediction is of my theory that if you don't see these certain things take place, then I wouldn't fault you at all for discarding my theory. It would be worthless. And so I'm going to read you one of those quotes from Darwin. And if you want to know, this is in Origin of Species, page 307. He says, geological research, though it has added numerous species to existing and extinct genera, and has made the intervals between some few groups less wide than they otherwise would have been, yet has done scarcely anything in breaking down the distinction between species. by connecting them together by numerous fine intermediate varieties, and this not having been affected is probably the gravest and most obvious of all the many objections which may be urged against my views. Now, he makes multiple statements like that in the book. And he also, his theory was that after 100 years into the future that you'll find so many more fossils, which we have, millions upon millions upon millions of fossils. And his idea was that as you continue to find more and more fossils, you'll begin to automatically fill in the gaps and it'll become evident. The theory will become evident. You see these finely graded transitions from one kind to the other, right? Which it never happened. And so really all the Darwinists out there should be looking and reading his book and do what he said. And just discard the whole nonsense. He gave you permission to get rid of it. In his own words. So now let's look at the geology a little bit more. Fossils out of order. These are classic. I'm sorry. Okay, so, all right, I forgot I had this. That's me holding a dino bone, by the way. Okay, so the idea, if we're talking about, say, a bird evolves, if you go back to that screen, please, thank you. So the dino evolves into a bird. This is like conventional wisdom. Everybody out there, if you read it, you look at it, any of the science that's out there, it's all this continuous indoctrination. Dinosaurs evolved into birds. In fact, now they're redefining birds and they're saying birds are actually dinosaurs. So they're redefining terms. And so if you look at the children's programs, you see them always portraying dinosaurs with feathers, when there's no real geologic evidence to support that. Not in a conclusive way. Unless they actually find a bird fossilized, like an Archaeopteryx. So the idea is if you have a dino down in the strata, a fossil, and it becomes a bird one day, then you should have a bird dino between them, right? There should be evidence of a transitional fossil. But here's what we actually find in the rock record. Go deeper, and guess what? We find another bird. It ruins the whole model. You can find this information on Wikipedia, ladies and gentlemen. It's not hard to find. All you have to do, look at the next screen. Okay, all right. I have another, I guess I got them out of order. But okay, so these are all examples of these transitional sequences. So the top one is the dino to bird sequence. And then the one in the middle is the horse sequence. You've all seen the horse sequence, right? Well, it's all been debunked. If it's still in a textbook, you should put a marker across it and put a big X over it because everybody already knows it's not true. And then you have the man sequence, and then you have the whale sequence. And believe it or not, they have a dog-like creature as the predecessor of the whale. Okay, so here's the problem with all of these sequences, whether it's the horse, whether it's the bird, whether it's the whale, whether it's the man. In every case, you have a contemporaneous fossil. You have a fossil that's too deep. It's too advanced and it's too deep. That's the problem. That's why they got rid of the horse sequence, because lo and behold, they find an advanced, the kind of horse you see at the top of the sequence, you see him below the lowest one. And that just ruins it. It's all over. There's nothing left. And it's the same with the whale. It's the same with all of these. And man as well. And so it's this problem with contemporaneous fossils. So if you look at the birds, so I just talked about how the bird is found too deep in the fossil record. It's found way below. If you can go to that next screen, please, on the birds. Okay, so what's wrong with this picture? So you have a velociraptor on the left, which usually they portray it with feathers, which is nonsense. The velociraptor is said to be 70 million years old, okay, by conventional dating, stratigraphic dating, whatever it is in the order of the strata, they have it at 70 million years old. And then you have the Archaeopteryx, which we've all heard of. There's about 10 fossils of those that have been found around the world. And it's kind of an odd bird, but it is a bird with feathers. It could fly, may not have flown very well, and it's at 150 million years. And then you have a really advanced looking bird on the right, I don't know if you can say that, Archaeornithera. It was at 131 million years. So if you just think of the years as where they are in the strata, so what I'm telling you is you've got two advanced birds that are way below the velociraptor that supposedly was the predecessor of the bird. You see why the geologic evidence does not support the evolution of a dinosaur to a bird, a theropod, a three-toed dinosaur. It does not, the fossil record does not support the evolution of dinosaur to bird. The evidence is not there. The facts do not bear itself out. So then why do we keep pumping it into people? Why do we keep preaching it? Why do we keep teaching it? So I'm going to show you an example of how the facts get contorted and we get indoctrinated. This is a clip. If you start this one a minute in, right? The Laetoli footprints. These are human footprints found in Tanzania, Africa. Go ahead and roll it.
3.5 million years later, anthropologist Mary Leakey found this path of footprints exposed once more by erosion. Two individuals clearly walked here, and details of the prints suggest that another followed them, stepping in the prints left by one of those who walked ahead. Footprints can reveal other secrets too, as forensic scientist Owen Lovejoy knows. They're often crucial pieces of evidence at crime scenes.
There's no better evidence than that provided by a footprint. That's what makes the Laetoli print so exciting, because they give us a direct record of how our ancestors walked almost 4 million years ago. When we compare the Laetoli print to that of a chimpanzee, the difference is immediately obvious. The chimpanzee, which is a quadruped but occasionally a biped, still has a free great toe, and that great toe extends out away from the foot and leaves a very distinct mark. On the other hand, when we compare the Laetoli print to that of a crime scene human print, they're virtually indistinguishable. The great toe is in line with the rest of the toes, and what this has done in the human and the Laetoli print is to create an arch. And that's a hallmark of typical modern upright locomotion, because the arch is an energy absorber. And that's the kind of fine-tuning that you would expect in a biped that had been that way for a very long period of time.
There's a whole sequence of these footprints that they'd uncovered. So you can see their stride. You can see there's many of these footprints. There's a picture on the left or in the center. So here's what I want you to get with this. It's really amazing that you heard they're saying forensics-wise, they're putting a mold in it as though it was a detective was going to be looking at these and going, I mean, it could have been you or I leaving those footprints and they wouldn't know the difference. You'll notice what he said. It looked precisely like a modern human Homo sapien. Precisely. Then why don't we accept it that that's what it is? Because it does not fit with the preconceived timeline. Human beings, Homo sapiens, are not allowed to exist in their timeline of 4 million years ago. Only the Australopithecus can live then. That's the little monkey person that's been heralded as our ancestor. So what they concluded was that it had to be, because of the 4 million year timeline, it had to be one of these pre-ape human-like things. So the Laetoli, Tanzania, Africa, the footprints were found in 1976, discovered by Mary Leakey, 3.6 million years old, or 4 million years old allegedly. This is a quote. In fact, they looked so human-like, some scientists had a hard time believing they were made by Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy species, the only human ancestor known to have lived at that time. So they're denying the obvious evidence that is a Homo sapien footprint because it doesn't fit with their timeline, their preconceived interpretation. Another quote from the New Scientist in 1983 said, these footprints are indistinguishable from those of modern humans. Hello? Because they are indistinguishable from modern humans. So Lucy is like this tall. It's like a chimpanzee, okay? It's like a little monkey. So what did they do? Put human feet on this weird little monkey and have him walk through this? It's ridiculous. Okay, Richard Dawkins said this. He says, what would be evidence against evolution? He always says it like evolution. It's always funny. It's always funny to me. I was like, yeah, it is evolution. What would be evidence against evolution? And very strong evidence of that would be the discovery of even a single fossil in the wrong geologic stratum. I'm like, he needs to wake up because they find them all the time. So let's look at the age of the earth. There's not enough time. If you had enough time to have the mutations and the whole process of evolution, there's not enough time for it. That's why they have to have the 4.5 billion years, because then it sounds plausible. If we have enough time, and I've actually heard people say this, if we have enough time, then really anything is possible. And I don't agree with that either. If given enough time. So I'm going to look at a couple of things. Radiometric dating. If we look at C14 at the top, now these are the half-lives of 4, and I don't want to get too nerdy here. I'll lose a bunch of you. But C14, I actually like that because the half-life is so low that you can actually verify a lot of the dates. You can say, well, we know when this volcano occurred. We know when this piece of furniture was made or whatever. We know that it was made in 1000 BC or whatever. And so we can compare that known knowledge of that item with C14 and see that it matches up or it doesn't match up and so forth. But C14 actually, because it has such a short half-life, can be very helpful. But a lot of times they will not use this method of dating on dinosaur bones and things like that because it cannot possibly, C14 only goes back maybe 50,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. So a lot of the evolutionary scientists, uniformitarian scientists, they will not use C14 on things they know are older. But there are a lot of scientists that have said, nah, let's go ahead and see what happens. And so they started taking C14 and using it on coal. And they've used it on coal all over the world. C14 only works on once living things. So coal is great because it's compressed plant material essentially. So, and guess what? Coal is not 30 million years old, not according to C14. According to C14, it's just thousands of years old, maybe 30,000 years old. And the dates are consistent all over the world, coal. And of course, how do the evolutionists respond to that? They would say, well, it's just contamination. Well, the contamination is pretty widespread then, because everywhere you go and you use C14 and you start dating creatures we're not supposed to date them, only to find out they're giving us valid dates. How about the diamond? The diamond's the perfect sealed, it's like a capsule of impenetrable. And so why don't we try to date the carbon in a diamond? It's like the oldest mineral on Earth. I mean, we're talking billions of years old. And guess what? Do you think they found measurable C14 inside a diamond sealed up? What do you think? You want to guess? Absolutely they did. Well, how does that work? So what I'm saying is that there's plenty of data out there, but the scientific community needs to kind of have a wake-up call and begin to realize that they really are just moving the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. They really don't have the case that we think they have. The more information we get, the worse their case looks. So we can get C14 valid dates on ancient rocks. We have dates of known volcanoes. Here's a chart real quick. We know when these volcanoes erupted. We know when the rocks were formed. And so they took them to labs. They didn't tell the labs where these samples came from. And so they take these to the labs, and they were measured by the labs on the right-hand column. That's how old the labs said they were. The middle column is their known age. So we know that Mount Etna, for instance, is 2,100 years old, but they're saying it's 250,000 years old. We know that Kilauea, at least part of it is less than 200 years old, and they give us a date of 21 million years. Another part of Kilauea, less than 1,000 years old, known, and yet they say it's 43 million years old. And on we can go with all the examples of these volcanoes that are known from all over the world. So then how much can you rely on the long half-life radiometric dates for reliable data? If you can get this type of a chart, wow. Okay, here's the other problem with the age of the Earth and the dating. There's soft tissue everywhere. Throughout the geologic column, there is soft tissue, like this is a T-Rex bone, and it started to, Mary Schweitzer's a paleontologist, she discovered soft tissue in a T-Rex bone. But now nobody bothered to look before because it's impossible. Nobody believed you could have soft tissue inside a dino bone that's 70 million years old. How can that be? But she found it by accident, and now everybody's looking everywhere, and they're finding soft tissue all over the place. And I'll tell you, it's a simple reason. All you have to do is use the laws of forensics to find out that soft tissue does not survive for 70 million years with no mechanism. I don't care what kind of mechanism you have. I mean, they had a hard enough time preserving a pharaoh for 5,000 years, or 2,000, 3,000, whatever. So I have a video clip I'm going to show you. Mary Schweitzer, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she's a paleontologist. She's the one that discovered this. It's been a while. This is back when the discovery was new, so it was shocking. And she got it, when it starts playing, I'll stop talking, but she got a lot of grief from the evolutionists for her discovery. And then she got a lot of grief from the creationists. And so she was kind of pulled between them all. She's an old earther, but she is a theist. So she's like in the middle.
Thrilling. Yes, very exciting. And that wasn't all.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
how could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
look at that,
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid...
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel.
You're
You
kidding.
see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time. I can't help it.
That is a form of time clock. In other words, there's certain things in nature that give us an indication that they haven't been here so long, or maybe they've been here longer than we think. And so those are what I refer to as a time clock, meaning there are things in nature which will give us an indication that maybe this hasn't been happening as long as we've been told. And this would be a great example, because you just use, like I mentioned, the laws of forensics to tell that we know the rate of deterioration of organic things. We know how fast it takes. We know, we can look at a human body that's been murdered, and we can look at it and say, this is so many days, so many, even to the hour. We can tell by the deterioration and breakdown of the flesh and the stages of that process of decay. We can tell how long it took. And so then extrapolate those laws of forensics to dinosaurs. And so now what they're finding is that the entire stratigraphic column from top to bottom is inundated with these bones and dinosaur bones that have soft tissue in them from top to bottom. So there are many other time clocks. If I had time, which I don't, I could go over and give you examples of a lot of different time clocks that show that the Earth is younger than what they've been telling us. Comets, we look at oil and gas, oil under pressure, waterfalls, the magnetic field, even population statistics. The Grand Canyon, if we were to examine that a little bit more and look at the rate of erosion and things like that, Niagara Falls, on and on we can go with things which indicate the passage of time, and to find out that the Earth, I don't believe the Earth, we look at Genesis, we look at the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, I don't believe that we're talking about millions of years. We're certainly not talking about billions of years. We're talking about thousands of years since Genesis, since the events of Genesis. And so why does it matter? Because it matters because, you say, well, I don't know, I interpret Genesis to be old ages and all this. But it matters because of this, because evolution requires huge amounts of time. And what I'm showing you is that there isn't huge amounts of time. Even if I could demonstrate, and I've talked to geologists that are uniformitarianists before, and I would say, listen, if I can demonstrate to you that the Earth is a few 100,000 years old, then evolution's over. It doesn't have a leg to stand on. I believe it's a lot younger than that, but the point is that you don't have to make the case that the Earth is, 10,000 or 20 or 30,000 in that sense, except from a theological standpoint. But what I'm saying is that if you can just show it, and all of these time clocks, all of them, there's probably 100 of them, and all of them show a much younger Earth, even if it's 100,000 or 200 or 300,000 years. It's phenomenally younger than what they're telling us is 4.5 billion years old. It matters because Darwinism, the house of cards, completely collapses under a younger Earth. Scientific laws that contradict Darwinism. Now remember, a scientific law is not a theory. It's something tried and true. It's something that's uncontested. It's something that nobody is debating anymore. It's over. And I'm going to give you 4 of them, and they all contradict evolution. These are the laws of heredity and genetics. Gregor Mendel was the breakthrough there, the scientist. The second law of thermodynamics, Joule and Kelvin. The law of biogenesis, Louis Pasteur. That's the idea that life can only come from life. It can't come from non-life. The laws of probability applied to evolution. Blaise Pascal was the... incidentally, all these people I just named are some of them, many of the founders of modern science. All of them, they just disappeared. All of them are Christians, they're theists, and some of them are deep in their faith. Let's see, which one is Sir Isaac Newton in that picture? Is he the second to right? That's Da Vinci, second from the left. Sir Isaac Newton is second from the right. Sir Isaac Newton is thought, if you ask your professors, just ask them without pre-influencing them, just say, who do you believe is the greatest scientist that ever lived? And they will all say Sir Isaac Newton. I'd be shocked if they said anybody else, because we all know this man was brilliant, absolutely over the top brilliant. And one of the things that the kind of atheists, the people that don't believe in God or whatever, they fault Sir Isaac Newton because they say, just think, if he had devoted so much time to theology and commentary of the Bible, what he could have accomplished as a scientist. Because he spent half of his time studying the Bible, learning the Word, but they don't understand how he ticks, because it's because of his faith that he became a great scientist. It's because he believed in the order in the universe and that you could discover all kinds of mysteries and secrets if we investigate and experiment and examine. And that God put it there for us to learn and to discover. And so Sir Isaac Newton was motivated entirely by his faith because he believed that God created the world. So all of these guys were that way. Louis Pasteur was given all kinds of grief because he rejected, and you will never see this in a textbook, but he was given huge amounts of grief because he was a scientist at the time that Darwinism was becoming popular. And they really gave him a hard time, and he had a number of scientists that aligned with him that said, we reject Darwinism, we don't believe it's true, on a scientific level we do not accept it. And so he was kind of persecuted for it. Cancel culture is not anything new. So these founders of modern science were all theists, and nearly all of them were Christian, and I can probably give you about 100 of them by name and tell you what their specialties were. And so I'm going to end here, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, where I began. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the fact is, you were created, and you as a human being have great intrinsic value, and an immeasurable price was paid for you. And so we as human beings have rebelled against God's goodness. And so God has reached out to us. He's extended his hand to us even when we were rebellious. Even while we were yet sinners, the scripture says that Christ died for us. And so he is continuing to this very day. God, who's the creator of the universe, became a human being to reach us in our rebellion. And he paid a horrible price to satisfy our debt to justice. And probably there's not a person in here who doesn't know something about the story of Jesus and that he died on a cross. And we are going to look at that in the series that we're in. We're going to look at the historicity of Jesus. What is the evidence? What do we see from history and so forth? But I just, listen, if you're here tonight, and maybe this cleared something up for you, I don't know. And if you want to talk, I'm going to be hanging out with Coffee Waves with you guys tonight until we end. If you want to talk, you want to hash it out, just something I said you don't like or you don't agree with, that's fine. We can talk about it. The conversation's important to have. And so it's how we learn, right? So, but you were created and you have intrinsic value, and God loves you. And it says he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Do you believe in him? Have you accepted Christ? He's reaching for you. Lord, we just thank you tonight for the witness of creation. That our Creator and his love for us is real and tangible. God, I pray that if there's anyone here tonight that has been painfully skeptical of the reality of God's reality, I pray you forgive them and cleanse them and draw them to yourself. I pray that every eye here, every heart would be open to Jesus. We commit this time to you in that name, the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so that's it. Whew, I had to push to get through that quick enough. I wanted to end around 9 so that we'd have time to go to Coffee Waves and hang out. And I really hope you all come. We've got the tab for you. And then also, if you're wanting to go on this kayaking trip, we'll try to figure out how to work you in. Talk to me, Val, talk to some of us about it. Let's figure out how to get you. It's a fun trip. Yes. This series that I'm doing right now, as far as it was called Evolution. Have you ever heard the other side? And all 6 parts are on our YouTube channel if you really want to delve deeper in a lot of things I'm talking about. There's so much more to say. Thank you, Marcus.